If you're here, you already sense there's something out there, something magical and mysterious, just waiting for you to find. And you've probably already discovered it isn't as easy as just thinking happy thoughts. You're not alone. Generations of shamans, philosophers, seers, and scientists have pursued this eternal quest. Where their ideas come together, you'll find powerful tools to cultivate magic and self-mastery in your own life. Welcome to the Magic and Mastery podcast. I'm your host, Donna Woodwell. I'm a former journalist, an author, a master astrologer, and a hermetic initiate, and it's my honor to be your guide. In each episode, I'll meet you at the crossroads of science and spirit, reason and intuition, to help you discover the wisdom that works for you. Are you ready? The adventure awaits. Hello, and welcome to the Magic and Mastery podcast. This is Volume 1, Episode 1, At the Crossroads. And this is the Magic and Mastery podcast. It's certainly fitting that we talk about magic, what it is, and the people who use it. My podcasts are, in a sense, meditations on magic. As such, they are rich fodder for contemplation, which is a nice way of saying that they're a little information dense. So, don't be surprised if you end up wanting to listen more than once, and that you hear something different every time. To make it easier to find the bits you're looking for, we've added headings and timestamps to the show notes, as well as links to all the references cited. You can find the show notes at www.magicandmastery.com/podcast. Oh, and one more thing. Be sure to stay until the end when I'll share an experiment with you that you can try out for yourself and see how the magic works for you. Now let's get started. In the previous episode, I ended with this. To recreate a new world, one that sustains us all, everyone will have to become a little bit of a magician. It's a safe bet that when folks hear the words magic or magician, they aren't thinking the same thing. For some, such words evoke visions of Harry Potter, Dumbledore, Gandalf, all magic wand-wielding wizards hurling lightning bolts across the silver screen. Alas, these pop culture depictions are pure fantasy, not magic. While they make good entertainment, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who would admit to having the power to throw lightning bolts. For others, magic may be something less epic, but no less miraculous. Wannabe spellcasters who look for love spells or scribble intentions under the new moon in the hopes of creating a happier life. Psychologists, however, dismiss such attempts as magical thinking. That's a belief that thoughts, by themselves, can bring about effects in the world. And it is hard to argue with that opinion. Imagine a child, after wishing someone would just leave, discovers that the object of anger is now moving away. And so the child concludes that their wish was the cause of the move. Or think of a ball player who wears a pair of unusual red underwear to a game, and then their team crushes the competition. The player concludes that the lucky underwear was the cause, and now must wear it to every game or risk breaking the streak. Such conclusions aren't logical. Just because a thought comes before an action doesn't mean that the thought causes the action. It's a fallacy known as post hoc ergo propter hoc. Such shallow beliefs are really easy to write off as superstitions. That's not exactly what magic is about either. For a clue about what magic is, let's look first at the Renaissance image of a magician. On the earliest tarot decks, the card we now call the magician shows a character standing behind a table which displays assorted objects. The rogue is rather forgettable. More of a traveling salesman or a con artist playing a shell game by the side of the road than a grand wizard. This magician card follows the fool, the nomad who carries his belongings slung over his back. It's as if the fool has paused from his travels, upended his bundle, and spilled the contents on the table for closer inspection. What the magician plans to do is left to the imagination, but that he plans to do something is clear enough. Otherwise, why pause and consider the objects at all? Put yourself in his shoes for a moment. Have you ever felt aimless, without purpose? Have you ever felt stuck going around and around with the sense that nothing ever changes? And have you ever wanted to just stop and do something, anything, to feel that something is moving forward, to feel like someone will notice you? If so, you've already had a taste of what motivates this magician. You see, magic, real magic, not fantasies or superstitions, is rooted in the very human need to create and then to understand. When we create, we give order and meaning to chaos and unconsciousness. That's the work of a magician. What was once only potential and formless becomes tangible, something that we can hold and look at, much like the magician emptying out the contents of his bag. Creativity, of course, comes in many, many forms. Well, recently I took my teenage daughter to see the film Little Women. From the corner of my eye, I caught her tearing up more than once. But the scene that really got to me was when Jo, after the death of her sister, finally sat down to write the book she'd promised to write. As the pages poured out of her, one after another, she laid them out on the attic floor, rearranging and reordering as she went, to link the scenes and images together in a meaningful thread. It's easy to see artists like Jo as the creator, birthing something new into the world. But the scientist, too, also creates. Like the Renaissance magician, they observe the world, and as they examine the pieces laid before them on the table, or under the microscope, or through the telescope, they uncover secrets and hidden structures. At their best, they also birth something new in the world, a new understanding of how it works. But how do such acts of creation occur? The desire to create and to know inspires the will to focus on the task at hand, to imprint a kind of order on what we see around us. Imagination, action, manifestation. That's the process of creation in our everyday three-dimensional world. It happens all the time. Creation is also what makes us happy, leading to the coveted state that the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi called flow. What is flow? Well, imagine a tightrope walker performing a high wire act. They are clearly concentrating, or else they topple off the wire into the net below. But they are not intellectualizing. They aren't thinking, oh, I must move this muscle here and that one there. That kind of self-consciousness would likely lead to a tumble into that waiting net. It's that perfect marriage of challenge and the skillful mastery to meet the challenge that creates the feeling of flow. When we are in the flow state, in the zone, so to speak, we experience activity without effort. Our sense of self diminishes, and we are at play with the universe itself. Creativity, too, happens when the ego gets out of the way and we are unself-conscious. Chasing such flow states has become a subculture of its own. In his book, Stealing Fire, Stephen Kotler explores how Silicon Valley, the Navy SEALs, and maverick scientists explore the crossroads of productivity, mastery, and flow states to achieve new levels of human excellence. But, as anyone who's walked such a road before realizes, it's never as simple as it seems. Eventually, you'll encounter your own resistance, your fears, procrastination, brain fog, and all the other stumbling blocks we toss into our own path. You realize that technique alone doesn't lead to mastery. Working on your deeper self matters too. And that's where the journey starts to get much more interesting. As I once discovered for myself when I was trying to get the lights on the printer to turn on, shit works better when you plug it in. The Marvel movie Doctor Strange tells the tale of another larger-than-life magician. A surgeon by training, he certainly mastered his craft. So, in his quest for healing, he embarked on his own journey to the mythical Camertage, and a teacher who, with one gesture, shattered his worldview as well. The experience left him on his knees shaking. He could have run away. He could have denied the evidence of his senses. He could have curled up in a fetal position, sobbing. Instead, he begged, "Teach me." Though cinematic and extreme, it is still an example of a breakthrough of what positive psychologist Jonathan Haidt called the vertical dimension. Though not nearly so extreme, I've had moments like that in my own magical training. For example, one evening I was curled up in my office chair, idly meditating. Meanwhile, my Hermetic teacher was at my desk, surfing the web on my laptop. Across the darkness of my nebulous inner landscape floated a strange image. a bright figure of the all-seeing eye from the back of a dollar bill. It was such an odd vision for me. The intrusion shook me out of my reverie. I opened my eyes to see my teacher smiling at me, amused. And then she turned around my laptop screen so I could see it. And there, on the screen, was a picture of the all-seeing eye. For a moment, my mind hung, suspended between realities. What just happened is not possible, and yet it happened. The desire, no, the demand to know overwhelmed me. For the true magician, the desire to know overflows every container. It tears open every reality bubble. I suppose it's no surprise, then, that this is how ancient magical and mystery schools envisioned the cosmos itself. To them, the physical universe of the senses, the below, is merely a shadow of a living mind, the above. Hence the Hermetic dictum, as above, so below. This cosmic mind, the grand magus, holds the form of things, the pattern of things, and its animating force gives life to these forms and patterns, and thus the world is born. What we think of as matter is merely just very slow, dense mind stuff. One thing endlessly overflowing, creating itself. Now, the idea of living cosmos is at the roots of numerous ancient and indigenous cultures, and is, some would argue, hinted at by the cutting-edge physicians such as those at the Quantum Gravity Research Project. But it's rather the opposite of the materialist mindset. Materialism suggests that the sensible world is all there is, and that the mind is merely an illusion it produces. Materialism is in part the child of 18th century science. It's the belief that if it can't be observed and measured, it must not exist. It matters, though, because it's a paradigm, or a reality bubble, that's led to a world where science claims to reign over the material, and spirit, all the non-measurable stuff, falls to religion. And since there's no common ground between the two, science and religion, the stuff in the middle, the crossroads, gets ignored. But there's a reason spell work is always done at the crossroads. That's where the magic happens. At the crossroads, where one way of seeing the world bumps into another, is where we can begin to see past our habitual limitations. It's where our psychological defenses give way and we can become more than the sum of our parts. In a sense, we're all meant to be filled with the divine, because we are the divine. Humans are spiritual creatures having a human experience. We are vibrating the will of our higher selves into the world. When Golden Dawn initiate and mystic A.E. Waite designed a new tarot deck to go with the work of his order, he gave the magician card a makeover. He depicted the magician holding his magic wand high in his right hand, with his left hand pointing toward the ground. In front of him is a table featuring talismans of the 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water. These represent the building blocks of the material world and the building blocks of the psyche. It's a symbol of plugging into the above in order to turn one's work below into inspired acts of creativity. The mage stands as a bridge between the worlds, because they know that the worlds are one, and so there's really nothing to bridge. But the animating life force is not gentle or benign. In its full force, it's overwhelming. When I was at university, our school transcripts were open for students to read from the guidance office. One day, when I was reviewing my coursework to make sure I had everything I needed for graduation, I stumbled across the recommendation letter my boarding school headmaster had written for me. Of course I read it. After I skimmed through the usual platitudes, my eyes fixed on one sentence. If Donna has one challenge, it's this: she's too enthusiastic. The words burned into my memory with a rush of shame and then defiance. The defiance I understood. Defiance is an act of self-protection. It's a heat that enables us to claim a little space for ourselves. The shame, however, took a little longer to understand. Because I'm a word nerd, I had to look up the etymology of enthusiasm. Today it means eager, optimistic, and energized. But once it meant filled with the divine spirit. So, Tell me this, how can enthusiasm possibly be a bad thing? How can anyone be too enthusiastic? Nevertheless, enthusiasm can make people very, very uncomfortable. That's because in our Western culture, we've utterly forgotten how to live plugged into the magic. After the so-called Enlightenment, science donned blinders to the above. Where does creative inspiration fit into a clockwork universe, an industrial age of a million widgets all alike? Meanwhile, certain threads of religion have also strived to reject the below. When you feel empty, it's alluring to look up to the heaven, spread your arms, and say, "Fill me." But unless you put the energy you receive to work, unless it's earthed in creativity and other life-affirming activities, the circuit isn't complete. And when a circuit isn't complete, there's no flow, and the energy dissipates. You have to go back and get another hit, and another, and another. And that's why some have likened religion to a drug. But it's not just religion that's guilty of this. It's any belief system that doesn't have a creative outlet for the energy it raises. The result is dependency, an ego yearning for its next fix. We fall prey to our own fear and greed and lust for power. Our ego proclaims itself God. Or we are duped by someone else who's ensnared by such things. We follow the herd. Or even worse, we can't bear the energy at all, so we seek to shut it down entirely. Life becomes dull, flat, unenthusiastic. To complete the circuit, we must plug in to the above and the below. And so begins the great work, as the alchemist named it, the materialization of spirit and the spiritualization of matter. It's our self-awareness, our consciousness, that's entangled us in the world of things. But it's also through our consciousness that we disentangle ourselves. For the alchemists, it was the element Mercury which served as both creator and created. He presided over the sacred marriage of opposites. And it's no coincidence that Mercury is the god of fools and tricksters, but also the god of magicians. And so the way forward for the magician is clear and twofold. The work is to embrace and understand the material world in order to create. The work is to embrace and understand the spiritual world in order to create. It's a work that will lead the grand magus to the doorstep of the great mystery. And that's what we'll explore in our next episode. In the meantime, perhaps you're eager to get started on your own magical adventure. Like a travel journal, magicians have learned to keep a record of their experiments so that they can remember and learn from their experiences. Such a journal has been called a book of shadows. If you want to get started on your own book but need some inspiration, I've created a special training for you. It's completely free, and you can find a link to it in the show notes at www.magicandmastery.com/podcast. This week's magical experiment is as natural as breathing. Find a quiet place. Being out in nature is ideal, but even a quiet room or your own bed at night will work too. And now close your eyes. As you breathe in, imagine breathing in light through the top of your head. And as you breathe out, feel that light flow through you and down into the earth beneath you. And then repeat the process, breathing in light from above and releasing it below. You may even feel a little energy flip as you transition from breathing in and out, and that's okay. The important thing to remember is to allow the light to flow through you and into the ground. There's plenty of it after all. Try this exercise a few times a day, several days in a row, and consider how you feel. If you want to talk about your own heroic journey, share your results from this week's experiment, or ask me questions, you can find me in my magical community, the Magic and Mastery Coven. You can find out more about it at www.magicandmastery.com/coven. And as I mentioned before, if you want to learn more about this week's episode, do check out the show notes at www.magicandmastery.com/podcast. They include timestamps as well as links to the authors and books that I mention. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Magic and Mastery with me, your host, Donna Woodwell. And as I said last week, I love getting feedback. It helps me to know what makes you jazzed so I can provide more of the good stuff. It would mean so much to me if you'd rate and review this podcast. And if you like it, why don't you share it with a friend? Don't forget to join me next week when we explore more of the great mystery and the great work. Thanks again for tuning in.